Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session in our masterclass series on renewable electricity procurement for smaller energy buyers. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. My name is Jackie McEwen, and I'm Program Director at the Business Renewables Centre Australia. We'd like to thank the City of Sydney, the CitySwitch program, the Sustainable Destinations Partnership for having us to present this series to you. Today, we are delighted to have several speakers. Two of my co-workers we will have today. We have Alex Nasser, our project officer. Hi, Alex. And Chris Briggs, Technical Director at the Business Renewables Centre and Head of Energy at Institute for Sustainable Futures. And we also have a couple of guest speakers to share a case study a little bit later in the piece. We have Jared Ingersoll, who led the Canva PPA, and Ben Waters, who supported Jared and a number of other organisations in that piece. So every week, more and more organisations, public and private, large and small, are looking to buy renewable electricity, motivated by both cost and sustainability drivers. Before we start, next slide, thanks, Alex. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging through thoughtful and slide. Just a quick slide about us. We're online. You can go and have a look at who we are if you haven't met us already. But we are Australia's leading organisation for offsite renewable energy procurement by business, especially via corporate PPA, the topic of today's session. We provide training and resources, market and policy updates and connection to other organisations to help people to procure renewable electricity. We are a not-for-profit and we are member-led. This next slide is just a little snapshot of our website and of our diagnostic tool, which helps buyer companies to choose the best way to purchase renewable electricity for them. A little bit more on this later. So we focus on ways of purchasing renewable electricity that is generated off-site. In searching for greener and cheaper energy, many companies will start looking at energy efficiency, then at on-site or rooftop solar options. When these are exhausted, or in the case where on-site isn't an option for a lot of office-based companies, the main options are for off-site renewable electricity, and these generally include green power, LGCs, and retail PPAs. Next slide. So to cover off on the main off-site renewable electricity options available, we've developed a series of training sessions on the how-to of options for smaller energy users. So you might be a large organisation, but you might have small energy use, or you could be a small organisation and have a small energy footprint. So PPAs tend to be for companies using at least 1 gigawatt hour per annum of electricity, but they have also been used for companies buying as little as 300 megawatt hours per annum. The size of your electricity procurement matters. It's not the only factor, but it's an important one. So if you know your electricity usage or load size already, then this session will be really helpful for you. We'll come back to that later. Today's session is essentially a part A in our Retail PPA series. That's stream 2 on the screen there. And it's the first in the Masterclass series for Retail PPAs. It is a repeat of our face-to-face session that we held on the 29th of March in Sydney. Part B to this session will be event 2.2, which will be held face-to-face in Sydney on the 3rd of May and repeated online on the 17th of May. Part B, or event 2.2 there, we will get into the detail of the procurement process, including the detailed business case. So please do register for that so that you can have a sort of a holistic overview. If you attended the Green Power session online, you may find some of this content at the start familiar, but this will change as we get more into the detail of PPAs. Today's session will also be recorded Just for your information, and it's for the benefit of your colleagues and other people's colleagues being able to benefit from the information today. So next slide on the course goals. So in this webinar, we're going to take a closer look at procuring energy from off-site renewable energy sources such as solar and wind farms. The focus will be on retail PPAs. A couple of things to note about today's 1.5 hour session. You will have received workbooks that we put together containing information to support you both during today's session, such as the explainer about retail PPAs, and in the following session, session 2.2, such as the business case template. All polls and exercises will be anonymous, and we do this for the purposes of facilitating sharing. So you will learn today a little bit about why companies procure. Just back to that slide, sorry, Alex, we just moved ahead a bit quick there. The benefits and limitations of retail PPAs, small to medium energy buyer examples from industry, and there are a bunch of those, a few extras in your workbooks. Key factors to consider, such as load size and tenancy. We will hear from industry, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to the Canva PPA. And we'll also tell you what we're going to cover in the next session. On to the next slide. So this slide here shows our buyer's roadmap at BRC-A, which is used by companies to guide them through the PPA procurement process. It's also available for free online at our website. In this session and 2.3, we will be covering off primarily on stages 1, 2, and 3, and a little bit into stage 4 to get you down the path. Next slide. So I'm just going to hand over to Alex now for a quick poll. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jackie. Yeah, so just to get us started and actively engage with the session, I'm just going to launch a quick poll here just to see where everyone is at in their procurement process. So on your screen now, there's a poll that should be displayed. So yeah, feel free to select an answer. We're just going to give maybe 20 seconds or so just to really get a flavor of all those that are attending today. And of course, it's all anonymous. So yeah, feel free to be quite liberal with that information. It's more just to, again, paint a picture for us. And so, yeah, right. Brilliant. So already got answers coming in. Yep. Go, Jackie.
We do. Thank you. Sorry. Going well, Alex. And it really helps us to understand a little bit about industry and where we can essentially focus our energies. As we are a not-for-profit, that's an important aspect for us. But it looks like we're getting pretty close now, Alex. Is it 71% participated? I'll hand back over to you for the results.
Yes, thank you. So now just going to end the poll. So everyone feel free to have a look at the results. So as you can see, the vast majority is in currently investigating options, which is fantastic. You know, that's what these sessions are geared towards, but it's even better to see that we do have some that have done a retail PPA or that have contracted, and some also interested in green power. So potentially someone from a previous session, and overall some newbies as well, which is always great to see. So yeah, I'll just stop sharing and pass it over to you, Jackie.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. And we do a lot of work with people who are absolutely new to PPAs, and then also with organisations that have already executed. So on this slide, we've got a great photo there from the Mayor of the City of Melbourne. City of Melbourne did led a couple of group PPAs, in fact, a few years ago. And these are the sorts of projects that really gave us a little bit of a picture for what the opportunity is here, whether you're part of a group or a large or small organisation. So the first 3 dot points there really talk to emissions reductions and meeting net zero targets, and that inherent, long-term carbon risk management that a lot of organisations are engaging in now. So that won't be news to a lot of you. PPAs also don't involve the same sort of capital expenditure upfront that's associated with on-site or rooftop solar. So they can be appealing from that perspective. They can help position your company as a sustainability leader in the sector, in your sector, and therefore also strengthen corporate brand. And so for some organisations also, supporting new investment in renewables and local communities is another benefit. Next slide. Thanks, Alex. So for smaller energy buyer organisations, there are essentially 5 options that we define at BRC. We have our retail PPAs up in the top corner there. And generally, if you're smaller, those are with an operating or an existing solar or wind farm or part of a portfolio. There are LGCs and green power, the topic of our previous session. There are a range of innovative alternatives, such as project equity and community solar that a lot of you might have heard about. There's also aggregation, which we'll be covering off in session 2.3. Next slide. So who's buying renewable energy PPAs, or renewable energy via PPAs? So it's very difficult to see the names on this slide. And in a way, that's a good thing, as there have been so many PPAs that have been executed now. In fact, 2022 saw the biggest rise in corporate purchasing of renewable energy via PPA in Australia to date. You can see this in detail, pardon me, on our website if you want to have a really close look. But hundreds of organisations have now signed PPA in just the past few years. So if you're looking at this now, there is a lot of precedent for this now. So it's not as new a thing to be doing, and there are a lot of learnings out there. We saw a wide range of deals done last year from the very large corporates like Apple, Telstra, Wesfarmers, etc. Number of group deals, IFM, QIC, and particularly some of the councils grouping together in procurement, and then also some of the smaller service providers, such as Canva, who we'll be speaking to today. Next slide. Thanks, Alex. So what is a PPA? So PPA is simply, it's a contract between an energy buyer and energy seller, whereby there is a guarantee that the energy being bought has been purchased from a renewable energy project, i.e. solar or wind farm. But it's also a contract for a specific or agreed amount of electricity at an agreed price and for an agreed period of time. So they're 3 elements that are particular to a PPA. And obviously they're there to support decarbonisation of Australian business as well as the electricity grid by bringing in more new projects. So why do companies do this? We touched on this a little bit earlier, but it can be helpful to break it down. There are 3 key reasons or groups of reasons. So achieving environmental sustainability targets, managing energy price fluctuations, and delivering social and environmental and reputational benefits, so not just green energy. Moving on to the next slide there, Alex. So one of the key benefits is that a PPA can achieve these reductions very quickly. So with your Scope 2 electricity emissions, you might have measured those, you might have installed a little bit of rooftop solar, you might have been able to do some energy efficiency, hopefully. You might also have a little bit of new demand that brings that back up again, and you have these remaining emissions. So an offsite PPA can basically cover those in one contract. Next slide. And it's worthwhile also looking into a couple of your other scopes. So Scope 1, what you can do about electrification. The City of Sydney led a fantastic series on electrification, and also electric vehicles and offsets for other aspects of Scope 1. So when you're looking at those areas, what can you electrify and perhaps bring back into your PPA? Some organisations are also looking into their Scope 3 to see what they can do in terms of influencing their supply chain, both upstream and downstream. So just on to the next slide. So then obviously managing energy price fluctuations has become incredibly important. Energy buyers might rightly question why whether prices for a corporate PPA can remain attractive over 5 to 15-year term. But electricity prices are notoriously hard to predict, and they are expected to remain volatile for a bunch of reasons. Last year, obviously, some international factors such as war in Europe, gas price increases, also some local factors. And I think in Australia, we had in the NEM, we had the highest price there. You can see at quarter two 22 occurred since the commencement of the market. So some really unpredictable activities. On the right there, you can also see those volatile spot market closing prices. Just onto the next slide there. And so we do know that out to 2050, as every couple of years, another coal-fired power station will close. And every time this happens, there's another bump around in the market, in the electricity market. So for a lot of organisations, locking in a price and knowing what they're going to be paying for that period becomes a very important and effective tool in budgetary management looking forward. On the next slide, just to see how that works. So if you're in a 1 to 3 year or a rolling contract, you can see how that price over those three-year periods will bump around. If you compare that to the red dotted line there, if you'd signed an 8-year PPA, then you would know what your price is going to be for that period of time. So you are currently exposed to market risk via those shorter term contracts. Just onto the final slide there in this little section. So as I mentioned before, PPAs are more than being just about electricity. So an important factor for companies is what we call project social and environmental co-benefits. So in addition to producing green energy, some solar and wind farms not only avoid negative impacts to the region where they're located, but they also contribute positively to it through things like biodiversity projects, education, community funds, etc. So more and more companies are really looking at this as a way of finding an electricity provision partner or a supplier that is aligned to their values. Next slide. Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to hand you back to Alex now for another poll, thinking about what's important for your business and what are your drivers. And this is really important because organisations can choose a range of different options for renewable energy procurement, but your leanings in this area are particularly important for that decision-making process.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So on everyone's screen now should be the second poll. So feel free to read through some of those options and select one or two or three. And if you have any opinions on maybe what drivers aren't included in there, feel free to drop that into the chat and we'd be happy to form a discussion around that. So yeah, feel free to now answer that. We'll allow maybe 20 more seconds. Yep, getting a lot of answers. Fantastic. So you can't see the race at the moment. However, it seems that net zero commitments and industry leadership are almost neck and neck, with net zero commitments taking the lead. The others seem to be quite even, which is interesting for the diversity across those drivers. And so, yeah, I'm just going to close the poll. Thank you for everyone who answered. And so on to the results. Yeah, so net zero commitments taking the win on that one. Kind of matches what we're seeing when people come to talk to us at Jackie.
That's right. And it's really encouraging to see industry leadership there as well. We've got a very diverse group of businesses and industries who we talk to all the time. So you can certainly be an industry leader, whether others in your sector have in fact contracted or not. That leadership is something that we want to see spreading right throughout all of the industry sectors. So we've got another quick poll for you now, Alex.
Yeah, so the next poll that we're going to talk about is more to do with some of the bigger challenges facing your organization and making that switch to renewables. So a similar format to the previous poll should now be available for you to answer. And so, yeah, feel free to have a read and we'll allow 20, 30 seconds for everyone to respond. And then we'll share the results after that.
Yes, and I've just noticed in the poll a couple of comments there on financial budgetary management not listed as a driver. So in that little other there, if you can enter that, that would be fantastic if that's one of your key drivers in the other priorities.
Okay, yep. Answers are coming through. Another neck and neck between expertise in energy and time and resources.
And that's something that we find is a particular issue for organisations. Not every organisation has an energy expert, particularly when you're in a smaller organisation and it's not core business. So that's why we run these sessions. Time and resources, again, a lot of procurement managers have, and sustainability and other roles have a lot of other tasks and priorities, and it can be very difficult to prioritise this. So we're hopefully going to help to make that a little bit easier for you.
And as everyone can see, yeah, so expertise in energy in the end was the victor by a close margin. Lack of industry imperative coming last.
So, and there are probably a few other issues there, but certainly other priorities is a really important one for a lot of organisations, focusing on their business, just the day-to-day running of business. Thanks very much, Alex. We'll move right along to session 2. So just a little bit now on the mechanics and understanding how a retail PPA works. So there is a little diagram there. And if you have a look, focus on the diagram possibly first. You as a corporate buyer will procure renewable electricity from a licensed electricity retailer. Not all retailers offer this. So many organisations will check with their current electricity retailer and then go to market. That electricity retailer will then sign a PPA on the other side with a renewable energy project developer, so a solar or wind farm developer. That electricity is that's generated, goes into the grid. So there's obviously no cable between the solar or wind farm and your operations, but you're just buying that back. So that goes into the grid, and then that retailer sells that back to you. So it is integrated into the electricity bill and connected to the physical consumption of energy in that way through that method. So it replaces your current electricity contract. And this differs from some of the very large sort of wholesale PPAs you might have been reading about in the paper. This is the type that goes through a retailer, hence the name Retail PPA. And they tend to be for organisations of almost all sizes. So generally upward of 500 megawatt hours per annum. There are one or two maybe that we know of that are a little bit smaller than that. They tend to be a contract that is 5, 7 or 10 years in length. There are some similar sorts of products out there that are around the 3 sort of year. They're not quite the same. With regards to costs vary with the level of firming. And we're going to cover this off in part 2, session 2.2. So we'll leave that one for there. But there are options around, and as you can see on that diagram, being fully firmed or fixed price, partially firmed, or wholesale price exposed, depending on your preferences. There is some cost to execute. Usually these are just consultancy costs. And you can really go to market. We encourage organisations to go to market for standard electricity at the same time. If it's something that you want to compare from a cost perspective, that's really the best way to compare those costs at any one point in the market. As I mentioned before, the market does move around. So when you go to market, will make a difference. There are some benefits and limitations, and we've outlined quite a lot of the benefits already. We also noted there on one of our previous poll slides that they're great for staff engagement and stakeholder engagement. They can also be a little bit more tangible than green power, where a linkage to a solar farm or multiple solar or wind farms or a community region can be made. Some of the limitations are, they're new to many, as including in this group. And they do require a bit more active engagement, particularly upfront, to understand all of the terms and conditions. Also, if you have a small load, sorry, there's a little typo there, you may expect fewer tenders. So the smaller you are, the more likely there would be fewer responses in your process, but it's always worthwhile going to as many as possible. And your consultant can help you with that. And also additionality is not always available. So additionality is something that a lot of organisations are looking at now, wanting to support projects that are actually additional to the grid, that are bringing in new renewable energy into the grid. At the smaller end, because you're not supporting whole projects, that can be challenging to achieve and not as likely in a retail PPA. So that's probably the one of the limitations that people need to be aware of. So just on to the next slide. Just double checking there are no questions there that I haven't missed. Someone's posted an interesting article there on PPAs. Thanks for that, Chloe. So how it works, just from a purely practical perspective. So you provide an advisor with information on your annual electricity or energy consumption. You'll seek a quote from your electricity retailer via your consultant, usually, for your next retail contract as a benchmark. So that provides that sort of baseline. That's if they do offer retail PPAs for renewable energy. Your advisor should test or sound out with other retailers for your size of procurement to see if there are one or more retailers who might be able to service your needs. So that will, as I mentioned before, depend on your size. And then your advisor will compare the offers against the standard retail offer at step 2 and recommend the best one for you. In terms of timeframes, we do say it can take around 3 to 6 months, but it can be as quick as a few weeks, but not usually. It's a little bit longer to get everyone comfortable with the contract. And it can be as long as 12 months. And we see these longer timeframes where organisations haven't been, I guess, as clear or as clear on why they're doing it, and as clear, I guess, with regards to their building internal support for the PPA. So I'm just going to hand over now to my colleague, Chris Briggs, to take you through a couple of examples. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jackie. So as you've seen, there are a lot of PPAs out there now. They're quite a mainstream part of our energy landscape, and most retailers will offer some type of PPA. So there's a range of models, and we'll unpack those a lot more in the next session. But here's a couple of quick case studies, I guess, to give you a bit of a feel for some of the typical PPAs you see in the smaller buyer end. So in this case, we've got a case study of Herbert Smith Freehills. And it's increasingly common, I think, to see professional service firms with net zero commitments. There might be a few of those in here today who sign up to an initiative such as, in this case, the Science Based Targets Initiative. It's a global initiative that provides support, some training and profile for companies that go on a net zero journey. And as part of that, then they went into a PPA. In this case, their load was just over 1 gigawatt hour per annum. And the speed, I think, of the PPA was an attractive feature of it. So they signed up to a 10-year deal, which sounds like a long time, but the pricing can be significantly more attractive on the longer terms than the shorter terms. And it, of course, provides the financial stability of knowing what your price of electricity is going forwards. They signed up the deal with Flow Power, who are one of the more active retailers in this space. And it was a combined wind and solar PPA, which can be attractive because the two of them together complement, with wind coming up early in the morning and then in the evening, and so you can get a good coverage across your energy profile. This is the type, I guess, of PPA that would typically take a few months that Jackie referred to earlier. Next slide. Northern Beaches Council is more what you would call a mid-sized buyer, sort of in and around the 25 gigawatt hours per annum, 25,000 megawatt hours per annum. But this type of PPA is also quite common down to sort of the 5,000 megawatt hour kind of range. So they were authorised by their council or staff were authorised to go and look at PPAs subject to the strict condition they had to demonstrate that there would be no price increases. What they came away with was a deal with a 5-year fixed price for 100% renewable electricity drawn from a portfolio of projects. Now, as I said, they were given a strict condition of no cost increases, but they ended up agreeing to a 5 to 7 year arrangement where the electricity price was linked to a particular formula, the changes in the futures price of electricity. So it could go up, but they were offered such a significant discount for their green certificates, the LGCs, that they felt confident that they were going to secure a lower price overall. And then the 7-year deal also included an option to extend to 10 years. So it's interesting, I guess, as a model, because a lot of, I think, companies have trouble getting their head around the idea of a longer term agreement, but there are options to build in stages and to build in some flexibility along the way. Their power was, they also had a direct link to, for the LGCs to a specific project, which gives them the tangibility of supporting a local project, and you can see what the estimated cost savings were there. That one took around a year and involved a formal tender process rather than going through a broker, as with the first case study.
Chris, I just wondered, my error there, I didn't pause for questions, just back on that previous slide there, Alex. We're just wanting to know if anyone has any questions they'd like to pop through the chat. I've answered one just now with regards to joint PPAs or aggregated group buying, and popped the answer there into the chat. Does anyone have any questions while we're a few minutes ahead of schedule on either how the PPA works or how any of these 2 examples worked for Chris or I? A little bit of radio silence. Yes.
I have a question. Thank you for answering the question of if joint PPAs take longer. I also am curious here, you're saying that this comes from a mix of a portfolio of projects, but it's also connected to a direct link to one project. So the 2 can coexist?
Yeah, so the electricity is drawn from the portfolio projects, which makes it easier for the retailer to source renewable electricity. It's sometimes less attractive to buyers because they want to have that tangible link and see where their money's going. So in this case, they have, as I say, the green certificates are coming from a specific project, but the electricity is coming from a portfolio. And I guess this type of model is more common amongst smaller buyers that don't necessarily have the buying power to support a single project directly. So this is sort of the mixed model that you sometimes find as retailers are trying to shape a solution that can work for buyers with lower buying power. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I've just also answered there a quick question from Kristen. Thanks, Kristen, on hotels and signing PPAs. Hopefully I've interpreted your question correctly there. And there is a great example that we will take you through, an aggregation of hotels within the Australian Hotels Association led by Lion. We'll do that in session 2.3, so please join for that.
Okay, I'll keep going then. Yeah, so I think we've covered. I guess we've started to canvass these issues, but size has an influence on the type of options that are available. So if you're less than a gigawatt hour per annum, you're very small in the context of the PPA world, because the project capacity you're supporting is less than a megawatt, and therefore it's less useful for projects to contract with you. So in most cases, you'll be working through a broker. You might have 1 or 2 or 3 retailers that might make an offer. And it's probably going to be green power or the purchase of LGCs in general. There are PPAs that go down that level, so you don't want to be too prescriptive about it, but that's in general where you're likely to end up. Small buyers then from 1 gigawatt hours up to 25 gigawatt hours. I think from sort of 5 gigawatt hours in particular, retailers say that the transaction costs of PPA start to make sense, and so you'll start to get more offers there. But at that sort of lower range, then you'll tend to get more of the portfolio type offers that we sort of looked at there. And as you get to the larger part of that spectrum, then you start to get more offers linked to specific projects and maybe projects that are in construction as well as already operating. So there's I guess a different spectrum is if you can get yourself up to, if you have the load or through combining with other buyers, you can get yourself to sort of 20, 25 gigawatt hours and up, then the options start to open up. Medium to large buyers from 25 gigawatt hours up, and in particular, once you get to 40 to 50 gigawatt hours a year, then the option of doing a wholesale PPA directly with a project, not just via a retailer, becomes an option as well, as you're, therefore you have more buying power and a more attractive partner. Next slide. Please, if you've got any questions, keep them coming in the chat. We'll keep an eye on them and we'll answer them as we can. A few points to note: if you are a tenant, there can be obviously additional considerations there where you're not the owner of the building. You may be constrained because if you may be located in an embedded network, for example, and so you need to check that. Obviously, your portion is via your lease and not your not via the electricity account. It's important to understand what the building owners are already committed to. They may already be 100% renewables, and you are therefore already covered. And if you're particularly lucky and you happen to be in the ACT, the government has actually bought 100% renewables already, and so you are actually already covered there. But notwithstanding the various limits that might be in play, an important part of an important role tenants can play is having that conversation with their building owner and encouraging them to increase their purchase of renewables, and that is an increasingly common pathway through which this happens as well. Next slide. So now we're going to run you through our diagnostic tool. We've developed a tool to try and help buyers who can answer, really only got to answer sort of 3 questions, and out of that then you can do some initial sorting of your options. It is a bit of a choose your own adventure. You can go backwards and forwards and change your answer and see where you end up, but this is just a simple tool to try and help you navigate your way through the initial selection of options and understand what might be available for you. So if you, I think Alex is going to run you through this, but if you click on, maybe we can just go back quickly on the last slide. If you click on the link or hover over the QR code, then it should take you to our website to fill out the survey. So I'll pass over to Alex. Hopefully it's enough time for everyone to quickly click on the link or QR code.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, we'll put the link into the chat as well while I go through this demonstration. But yeah, so as Chris mentioned, so the point of this is to really give you some touch on some more information that we talked about, give you some options, some potential avenues, and a bit of a dichotomy on how you can approach that. So let's say, for example, in keeping with the theme of today's session, that I'm a very small or small organization, small load and under 1 gigawatt hour per annum. So I've clicked that option. I click next, and I'm a bit more sustainability focused. Of course, financial management outcomes comes in at some point, but let's just focus on the ambition and sustainability. So I click next again. And so aggregation. So, do I want to combine my load with some other small energy loads and other organizations to get a bigger load? And as Chris mentioned, ideally get a better deal for that larger load. I'm going to say yes in this case. And then after that, yeah, it's just a matter of filling in your information. You guys already know this already, so nothing surprised there. And then you'll be sent an email with some of the options that your choices have led to. And so as you can see, my one is, or my 2, I should say, a large scale generation certificate or LGCs or innovative alternatives. So it's a bit of a matrix with some of these options. And so this is just, again, to give you that beginning kind of step and provide some more direction. And so I'm going to go back to the slides and hand you over to Chris.
Okay, just flick through. So just, I guess, to give you a little bit of an idea, as Alex said, there's a bit of a matrix involved, and so we'll just talk through some of the options where you might have ended up answering the survey. So you can see top line contracting option, second line size, very small or small. Secondly, primary driver, whether you are price driven or sustainability driven. In practice, most buyers are in fact a combination of the two. but for the purpose of the exercise, we've sort of make you choose one or the other. So then your options become 4 options. One is to switch to a greener retailer for 100% green power. So even if your option is green power, there are still opportunities for you to exercise your purchasing power by choosing a greener retailer. Check whether they are, for example, active in buying new renewable energy. And in that way, you are indirectly adding to demand for new renewables by the retailer you choose. Second option then is LGCs only. So for buyers who don't have significant load but want to see a link between their purchase and have more direct impact, you can look for an LGC purchase from a specific project. Third option then is the Retail PPA. And so this starts to kick in then for the small buyers, where, as we've said, you've got an option of a portfolio PPA or from an operating project. And then the fourth option is for those who might be more ambitious and might want to look to own for an ownership stake in a project or something similar. So, for example, the City of Sydney put in its tender that it's had a preference for community-owned renewable energy, and the retailer then went out and signed a PPA with a small community-owned project in Shoalhaven, and that became part of their mix. So there are other ways in which you can have more impact through your purchasing power. And I think in the next session, we will really run through all of these options. Next slide. So I don't think we've got time necessarily to run through all of these options. This is something we did in the in-person one, but we will, as I say, unpack. There's a whole range of models then within retail PPAs. We will unpack those further in the next session.
Chris, you might just want to address, there's a question there, why is green power not as much a fit for ambitious sustainability driven as LG, but LGC is? Do you want to just talk about that level of control? Yeah, sure. So I think generally to buy through green power, you're getting certificates sourced from, it can be from a whole range of different projects. The projects might have an older vintage. You don't really actually know exactly where you're buying from. You are buying from a renewables project, so you're adding to demand, and that's positive. But with an LGC purchase, you are buying from a specific project. So there's a more direct impact, and you're helping that project by providing financial security for the sale of those green certificates. So they're both good. They both add to demand for renewables, but in general, there's considered to be a higher impact from an LGC purchase. Thanks, Chris. There's also a little question there from Chloe with regards to additionality, and does the tool articulate that for each of the options? In fact, generally speaking, for each of these, they won't achieve additionality. It will depend a little bit on your size. So you can imagine with that matrix that Chris showed just previously, we also have medium, large and very large organisations which have further options. So you don't really start to get that additionality benefit until you are looking at a retail or a wholesale PPA with a new solar or wind farm or portfolio of new projects potentially. So that's really where you start to get that, not so much for these options. So that was one of those limitations that I mentioned of these options. Hopefully that answers the question. Any other questions there for the group, from the group?
Could I clarify there, responding to your answer, that so for a small player to achieve additionality, they would need to be doing a joint PPA for either a wholesale or a retail PPA. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So to access that, really you need to be joining an aggregation of that point there just at the bottom of that slide, because it is something that's just not really offered by the retailers through those other methods, because you're not able to support a whole new project. It's just a practicality, unfortunately. Anything else to add, anyone, from that?
Well, I guess just that legally, the definition of additionality is that you retire your green certificates.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So that they're submitted to the regulator and not on sold. So legally, so long as you've retired your certificates, then you are achieving additionality. I guess the concept of additionality is quite complex, and some people have different definitions. Some people would say, it's only additional if you're supporting the purchase of new projects. Others will say, well, you're still contributing to demand, and that flows back through ultimately into new projects. So I think there's a recognition amongst most that different size buyers have different options in front of them, and smaller buyers, so long as you are retiring certificates and therefore creating that additional demand, then you are meeting the legal definition of additionality and in an indirect way helping to support new renewables.
That's right. Thanks, Chris. And that's probably why we really sort of allocate that particular option to that higher level of sustainability than the other options. So just moving right along now. So we're going to move now to introduce both Jared Ingersoll and Ben Waters. Jared is he led the Canva PPA and a number of other initiatives for that organisation. And then we're also going to hear from Ben Waters, who is principal at Presync, consultancy that has delivered a lot of smaller energy buy PPAs as well as other size PPAs for larger organisations. So Jared and Ben will take us through some of their experience. They will focus more on the why and a little bit on the how, and obviously we'll be focusing a little bit more on the how and that more detailed procurement process in the next session. So I'll just hand over to Jared and Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Jared, are you there, mate?
Yes, I'm here.
You're under your desk.
My apologies. Sorry, guys. I was, yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah. So far, this is coming across really professional. Lovely to meet you all. Do you want me to just kick off like last time, Ben?
Go for it.
Please do, Jared. And we've got a bunch of slides there, so just feel free to ask Alex to change those for you.
Yes, I will indeed. So I'm going to just sort of talk about the experience of getting Canva onto a PPA. And I am not the energy procurement expert. I've learned a lot. Ben's the one that can answer a lot of the technical questions. So I went into the conversation around a PPA after a contact at the City of Sydney, and I was looking at different types of things, and I learnt a few of the learnings that I sort of got along the way is that the energy market it's murky. It's a difficult thing to get your head around, but once you sort of jump into the waters, you realize that you're better off. There's a way. There are people that are experts on specifics, and so I learned really quickly that I needed to engage a consultant to help navigate some of the technical complexity. And then what I was able to focus on is the internal approval processes that can sometimes get really hard. So if me, the head of sustainability, was learning about it, then if I had to turn around to the CFO or the CEO or the different people, getting them across a complex process was really tricky. So what I ended up defaulting to was just really drilling down on the why. Why are we doing this? And so I've got a few slides that I've got at the beginning. I often use these in lots of different talks, but it basically talks about this first one. I haven't updated these slides, I should say, for about a year, but the data is relevant. But there's a few learnings that I have in the first 3 slides, which help me form the conversations that I need to have internally about getting the approvals needed for a PPA. And the big one is that we're doing this because of climate change. This is data that Leslie Hughes put together he's done a lot of work for the Climate Council, and it sort of shows that there is a little bit of a dip when we stop doing things, but we've still got a long way to go in order to tackle the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere. I'm going to go to the next one, Alex. This is Dr. Rebecca Huntley did a lot of research around the attitudes of Australians around climate change. And the relevance to this is that I found that if you are presenting something to around climate and you start to get resistance or you start to get pushback or questions internally, this is a really refreshing thing. So what this shows is there's a spectrum of people's attitude towards climate change. And you can see that the number of people that are dismissive is really small. And then you've got this spectrum of people that have varying levels of concern around climate change, all the way through to the almost 25% of Australians that are alarmed and want to take action. The takeaway from this is that if you are speaking about a PPA, energy, anything to do with climate, you've got more people on your side than that are against you. And what you generally have to do is to take them through the conversation. Everybody wants, there's more people wanting to make positive change and transitions, and especially transitioning to renewable energy, than there are people that are blockers against it. So when you're going into the meetings, just be aware that more people want to help you and are on your side than what they're against you. And on the next one, please, Alex. Oh, no, the other next one. And this is something that there's a little QR code, and we put together a really awesome little infographic with Leslie Hughes. And this is the last little bit of relevance, which is it shows what this makes me, this is a deeply personal one. I'm doing this because in my kids' lifetime, best case scenario, they're going to be experiencing a planet with over 1.5 degree warming. It's actually looking more like around 3.2 degrees, which is pretty diabolical. But if you can look at the life timeline of your grandkids, it's a very different conversation. So we need to do things now. And the really beautiful thing about energy, and why I think you're all a bunch of wonderful humans for being involved in this program, is energy procurement has a very, very long tail. You get people on the PPA, and its terms of the contract is long, and everything's long, and including the benefits of it. If you want to jump to the next one, please, Alex. This is quite a powerful slide, because all of those graphs and numbers and data, and even though you contextualize it into humans, thinking about temperature gradients and parts per million of carbon and all these sort of things is still a little bit technical. But this data shows that the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees warming is significant. You're talking a jump from 14 to 37% of people exposed to extreme heat. And in Australia, that's big chunks of the country starting to become uninhabitable. And then if you look at things, another one's particularly relevant for Australia, the difference in the 0.5 degree temperature gradient is almost all of the coral reef gone. So visuals like this I found were really helpful, because carbon is confusing. Temperature gradients don't seem that alarming, but then when you actually put it with a visual that people can help you, that's a really great way to mobilize people. Next one, please, Alex. We came up with a vision. So the sustainability team at Canva was very small. It was me plus a couple of consultants and a bunch of ring-ins. And we came up with a vision that was loose enough for us to be able to figure out how to get there, but still ambitious enough to mobilize people and create action. So I noticed in the first survey and the second survey, a lot of people here are sort of, you're already on the journey, you're trying to figure out what to do. At some point, the biggest challenges that I had with Canva was that the period of the PPA was 10 years. Canva had only been around for 6. So for them to agree to a contract. That was the longest contract they ever had. So we had lots of pushback internally with the procurement team and the legal team and stuff. They're like, going, why does it have to be so long? Sorry, Ben, did you want to chuck in a?
Oh, no, you go.
No. And the next one. This was, again, there's a lot of relevance with this. There's a lot of, if anybody's really focusing on their net zero thing, the net zero targets, this is a snapshot of, I would say, it reflects SaaS companies. It's very different for different industries. The really cool thing about the utilities and the PPA, the moment you make that switch, you get a massive, like it's almost like, it's flicking light switch. Sure, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but the moment you make that decision to change, in this particular instance, the utilities, most of that was electricity, so that number dropped. And then because I was talking about electricity, we did a lot of work with where our data was housed and with our service providers. And so we were able to make a huge drop to our overall emissions reduction strategy and our targets. And all I did was got people turned on to energy. This is why we're doing it. We're doing it for our future. We're doing it for our kids and your kids and the natural environment. And then once we had that energy sort of conversation mobilized about the team, it got very, very little pushback. And in fact, when it came to the point of we were staring down the barrel of penalties from AGL, I was very confident in a position where I was prepared to take that hit because everybody was so pumped and excited about it. Next slide. Sorry, Ben, I've been talking for too long. I'm going to bash through this last one really quickly. And this was a final thing that we did to just really sort of seal the deal. We set our targets, our hearts on a true zero target by 2028, 2030. Realistically, Canva may not get there, and I don't know how anyone will get there, but we just went, let's set a really, really ambitious goal. And if we get 70 to 80% of the way there, it's still much better off if we go on the trajectory of growth and scaling and our emissions. And that's what's been tracked in that red line there. Sorry, and I think that's it. I don't think there are any more slides, is there, Alex? There is one. Sneaky. Sorry, Ben, I'll be really quick. The relevance of this is that we became carbon neutral through Climate Active. And so I was able to get the organization to commit to purchasing carbon offsets, which meant that every ton of carbon, we get a bill. And once we had jumped on that journey and the organization made that commitment, we were able to start working on carbon budgeting internally with the procurement team. And then that was actually a really, really powerful tool because it meant that when it came to comparing like for like, that when we put the price of the carbon offsets on top of that contract, it tells a very different story. So if your procurement team are looking for, if the procurement team's KPI is the cheapest possible deal, the moment you drop the carbon accounting or budgeting into that, it paints a very different picture. And that also was really powerful when it came to working with the procurement team around how we tackle our Scope 3's emissions over the next few years. I'm pretty sure that's all of it from me. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, mate. And this was a great project, really interesting one. Started in the middle of 2020, just after we'd gone into COVID lockdowns. It was an introduction, as I think you said, by the City of Sydney, with whom we were working, I guess, about a year earlier than that, facilitating their renewable PPA, which Chris also mentioned. And as regards drivers, I think you've heard from Jared about drivers. So drivers could be about sustainability, or they could be about cost stability or lower cost, getting off the roller coaster that is business as usual, short-term electricity procurement. But Canva, it's sustainability, it's climate, and that's a great place to be in. Though I would say that the lower cost and the lower variation in cost stability that you ended up with, they were pretty substantial co-benefits, and that this PPA has gone very well. I'm thinking about the hurdles. Yeah, I think we have the normal hurdles of explaining the electricity market and electricity procurement to a company that's very good at what they do, but doesn't know that, and it's complicated. The hurdle you mentioned, that you're actually in a contract with a major retailer until June 2023, and you wanted to break that to go and do a PPA. That sounded high risk. That sounded like it was going to be expensive. Actually, whilst your electricity buyer was telling you that was going to be the end of the world and there were going to be tens of thousands of dollars of penalties, it wasn't the end of the world and there was no penalty. And imagine if you'd been on that deal until now, and you were now in the market trying to secure your next deal to start in July this year. Your prices would have been double to triple what you ended up with. So that was the low risk option, was to break your AGL deal and do a 10-year PPA.
It would have also been quite damaging to our carbon story as well, because it would have meant that we would have delayed when we're going to start trying to tackle our reduction of emissions. And because we were committed to a carbon reduction, there were so many reasons why it made sense just to go, we just got to do it today. There's no point delaying. There's no scenario where delay is positive for anybody.
You could have bought some LGCs separately, but I don't think you would have got them as cheap as you got them by doing a 10-year PPA. This is one that runs until December 2030. It's linked to solar farms at Parkes and Griffith. On the additionality question, they were, I think, newish solar farms at the time. Your retailer, Ongi/Simply Energy, developed those projects, and you were amongst the first off-takers from them. It is hard for a little company to bring a new project on, but what have you bad if your retailer brings on a new project and you get a slice of that? Is that additional? I'd say it is. And you're certainly surrendering those nice cheap LGCs you're getting from those projects. So you're definitely additional in terms of scope to carbon reduction and in terms of incremental renewable energy compared to the federal renewable energy target. You got a fixed PPA price plus a firming adder, which was zero at the beginning, which was known for the first 3 years. First 3 years are about to run out. And from now on, that does peg to the market. But the majority of your price is fixed to a known low price related to the cost of the solar generation. So yes, there'll be some change as the market moves, but it's much more stable than business as usual electricity, where the 100% of the price swings with the futures market. It's a fixed low price for LGCs, as I mentioned. You've got, one of the nice things about this deal is you've got the flexibility to buy extra LGCs to cover, for example, the impact of your people working from home, as they have been during COVID. So you actually went over and above and did more than offset your own electricity use at work. You bought extra LGCs, and I keep saying you, but Canva did, and you no longer work there, but Canva is covering its work from home carbon via this deal. It was unusual in that it was covering a company with enormous growth. I think the employee numbers were doubling every few months. It has a load that ramped up from about 1 gigawatt hour at the start to 2.5 gigawatt hours 4 years in. So that's unusual. It wasn't just for a fixed amount of electricity. It did ramp up, and that was based on a lot of modeling and forecasting that you and I did on your electricity consumption. Process took about 6 months. The procurement wasn't a formal tender or anything like that. It consisted of Presync going out to probably the 4 most successful progressive retailers that we'd worked with in similar projects, and we got quotes. Not everyone wanted to give a quote for a 1 gigawatt hour load at the beginning. We got 2 quotes, though quite different. One was linked to particular wind and solar farms, balanced by the spot price. The other one was the one you ended up with, was basically fixed for the first few years, or at least known for the first few years, with the future adjustment relating to the futures market. Both of those were excellent deals. Both of those were much better than business as usual. Even certainly the deal you're on, but definitely compared to what would have happened if you had not switched to a PPA. Additionally, we talked about, look, I think that's probably enough for me, but I could very happily answer questions on this one all day.
There are a couple of little questions there. Thanks so much, Ben and Jared. That's really great. And I guess I'll come to that. There's just the one question in the chat there, but I guess on that point of additionality, if it is something that your company is ideally seeking, then going out and mentioning it in your tender, obviously, it can't hurt to ask. And so that's probably a good way to go about things. And then I guess just probably another point to add there are sort of a good 14, 15 plus retailers offering retail PPAs, not all in the smaller end of the market. So as Ben mentioned, you could receive sort of more like the 2 or 3, depending on your size, or more tender responses. But there's a question here for Jared from Chloe. Who did you work with to facilitate the solar bulk buy? I don't know whether or not you're at liberty to share that information.
Sorry, Chloe, what are you referring to? Sorry, is that the?
On the slide there, it says solar bulk buy. So was that you purchasing the LGCs, or was that actually you saying, hey, everybody, let's get solar, let's do it at a reduced price if we all do it together?
So that was a concept that I was working with Grant from Inosi, and this is more his baby to speak to, but we were looking at a couple of different options. So there was, what would it look like if there was one of the conversations like, do we buy a solar farm? And we quickly sort of went, well, no, that's not for us. Do we make available resources so that employees working from home can, do we help them get solar on their roof? And so then we ended up looking at how we can use the position of the PPA to create a product that was accessible to the employees at home. And so using the PPA as essentially like a security position of like, we've got all this energy, we're secured it, it's a good deal. How else can we repackage it or make it available to different people? So that solar bulk buy for work from home was something that we covered with the LGCs. And it was part of our PPA. We just sort of over-reported and we made an estimation, but we were actually looking at, okay, so we've got this really sweet deal and we're really keen to decarbonise as much as possible. So what are the other levers that we can pull once we'd secured our energy procurement?
I think I misunderstood thinking that you'd done a bulk buy of rooftop solar for the individuals in your organisation.
Yeah, I might update that bottom left-hand square there, because that was sort of, this is one of the things we're working on. It didn't quite get it across the line before I finished up. But for anyone that's sort of starting in the energy journey, the other lessons that I learned along the way is that energy brokers lie. They don't tell the truth. Like I found that the guys that were looking after our contractors, it's classic. Like if somebody else is getting paid by if the person that's looking after you is getting paid by your supplier, far out, man. Their vested interests are not on your side. And the other observation that I had is that the energy industry, in all the conversations I had, they made the same sound as the taxi industry 4 years after Uber. So there's a lot of people in energy who it's in their best interest to make it as painful as possible or as confusing as possible. But once you go through it, you realize that it's actually kind of simple as long as you align yourself with brains like Ben, or just people that know how to navigate some of the technical aspects.
That's great. Thanks, Jared. We don't have any more questions now, but everyone, please do an electronic applause if you can for Ben and Jared. And thanks so much for sharing. It's one of the things that makes our work so much more effective is having people like yourselves being willing to share with the group. So thanks very much for that. So now I'll just hand back to Chris onto the next slide, and we're going to do a little breakout group activity. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jackie. So as it says, building a business case part A. So this is the first part of this session, and I think the next part will be in the next class. what we're going to do now is to have a breakout room and get you to answer 3 key questions as part of how you would build a business case. Number 1 is, who are the main internal stakeholders within your organisation to switch to renewables? Who are the key decision makers? We over and over again hear that this is actually the hardest part, that you can get a bit lost in the technical detail and the different deals and so on, but actually it's building the consensus across different parts of your organisation that need to sign off on a decision like this. That's the hardest part. So you should approach this as like a stakeholder exercise as much as a technical one, and properly map out your stakeholders. So question 1 will be for you to start identifying who they are and who you need to get involved in the decision. Number 2, what is your annual electricity usage and how is it likely to change in the coming years, as that will change potentially the type of deal you'll need to do. And 3, what would be the next steps for you at this point in terms of progressing this? So I think we're going to break.
Thanks everyone for participating. We're now just going to run through, and Alex is going to pop those slides up for us now on what's going to happen in the next session. I hope everyone found that session and that discussion helpful. Okay, and so what happens in session 2.2? So that's where we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of the procurement process. We're going to talk about the types of PPAs. I mentioned retail PPAs. I mentioned some of those options today, but we'll get into what those mean, and we'll provide examples of each of those from industry. We are going to get into the building internal support component and how to do this. We've sort of really put forward to you how important that is today and how that can mean the difference between 3 months and 12 months or longer. So there are some important things to think about in that process. Common PPA challenges and how to manage those. As I mentioned before, there have been a good number now before that have executed PPAs. So managing various challenges through the contract there are some good precedents for that. Best practice for retail PPAs. We talked about a few concepts around best practice today, such as additionality and project co-benefits. So a little bit more on that. And then we'll go through the detailed business case template that we'll also be providing each of you with. Just onto the next slide. Thanks, Alex. And so there's just a little comparison slide there. We did this for the green power and LGCs, and we've session, and we've added the retail PPAs there, just for you to sort of, I guess, if you're still unclear in your mind as to which might suit your organisation, there's a little bit of a high-level summary on that. Just onto the next slide again. So today we've shown you the key reasons why your organisation might choose to buy offset renewable energy and what the rest of the industry is thinking too. We've talked about the key features, benefits and limitations of retail PPAs for smaller energy buyers, although many of them apply to whatever size. The key examples from industry, and as I mentioned, you've got some more of those in your workbook, and there'll be some more presented at the next event. We have an industry speaker coming to our next event, who I won't announce today, but someone we have mentioned today, who will be wonderful to hear from as well, a real industry leader. And we've talked about the basis for thinking through that business case. So feel free to use the tool. Join us for the next session. Please don't forget to register. And if you need some more information before that session, which is on the 3rd of May, so it's a little way off, jump online on the next slide there, jump back to our website and have a look at what's available there. There are a good number of free resources. We are a membership-based organisation, so we have a lot of options for members and non-members. On the next slide, we also run training boot camps. These are a 1.5 day, in fact, more of a single day now for retail PPAs, and a little bit longer if you want to learn about wholesale PPAs. And then final slide, just squeeze it in to 2:30 there. We have an attendee survey. We would love your feedback. Please jump on and do that. Also, feel free to email the City of Sydney if you'd like to provide any other feedback outside of that survey, and we will take that on board for the next session. We hope to see you all there. If you can make it on the 3rd, face-to-face, please do in Sydney, and if not, online. And also check out the Green Power and LGC's session that we recorded towards the end of last month. Thank you.
Thanks, this is great.